Welcome to PhD&D here on YouTube, and this is a video response to Same Old G, who came out with a great video on how you create a villain, how you create that villain and incorporate that villain into the narrative of your story, into the mechanics, as he said, of your story. So I got a little time here, so I'm going to do this response because I feel like that's an extremely important part of any campaign, any game, and I've got a great way that I do it. Interested to see what other people say here as well, though. So, first off, got my adventure creation binder, which I did a video on a long time ago. Not a long time ago, but it was one of my first videos, just kind of highlighting what I have in here. This was something that Dungeon Master Johnny inspired me to do. He had one, and I'm going to basically go into the villain section here and start with the outline that I use anytime I'm coming up with a villain. I like to refresh my mind there. So, with villains, and Same Old G, you said you know this, and you've heard it a lot before, but it does start with a good motivation. Find the motivation of that villain and have that fleshed out. What do they want? What are they trying to do, first of all, before you go into anything else with them? What do they want? What are they trying to do? Why do they want that? Come up with those, answer those questions, because great villains are not the prototypical, want to dominate the world just because. That's, in my opinion, that's a lazy villain. It is overused. Doesn't have a good story behind it. So good villains believe that what they're doing is the right thing, and they may not see themselves as evil even at all to get to their end that they're looking for. Look to real-world sources for inspiration as well. A lot of villains throughout history didn't think that what they were doing was wrong. Obviously, they were a little skewed in that aspect, but just know that. Other things, just quick notes. Expect your villain to die, and you don't ever know when that's going to happen. You take a lot out of a game if you try to protect a certain villain. If you try to make sure your characters can't kill this certain villain, that takes a lot out of a game, unless you do it right with certain villains, because villains also need to interact with your heroes on multiple occasions, whether that's in person or not, whether it's maybe through some ritual or through messengers, whatever. They need to be interacting with these players. If you really don't want them to die, don't put them in the same room as the characters early on, because you never know what characters can pull out and what they can do to this villain who you might have grand plans for. So, one of the best tips is, with a good villain, you can feel his hands working behind the scenes. Good villains, and this comes straight from Wizards, has a video on YouTube about Adventure Builders Workshop, I think is what it's called. This comes straight from that. Villains need to be both highly proactive and reactive, meaning villains, you need to visibly see what they're doing in your campaign. That's a good villain. If you can see, their hand at work, you can see that this wizard in the forest nearby this town, you can actually see things happening in this town that he is causing. That's being proactive. He's doing things in this world regardless of what the characters are doing. Maybe they're not even following that storyline, but they can still see this guy nagging, see his effects coming around. That will bring them to him, perhaps. Also, reactive. If your players do something that's going to upset him or kill off a bunch of his henchmen, whatever, he needs to react to that. He can't just let that slide and move on to his next thing. Make sure he's reactive to what they're doing. Make sure, like in my campaign, I had this one villain. The group actually got out of meeting him in a battle because they talked their way out of it. They promised to recover an artifact that had just been stolen by a bigger campaign villain. They promised to recover that artifact if this guy let him escape with their lives. This was a drow, however you say it. He let my characters escape with their lives on their word that they would return with his stolen stone. They didn't do that. They flat out lied to him, got out of it, went on about their business, did some other things, and a bad villain, you just wouldn't hear from him again, or you wouldn't hear from him until later. But before long, these assassins started trailing the characters. there were people coming after him because they broke their word. The villain found out they weren't going after the stone, so he was reactive to their events. They ignored him. He came after him. That's just an example there. But, you know, that's a couple of things, but you also wanted to know how to incorporate this into your game, into the narrative of the story. Just make sure with villains you've got, I always say, you know, have some type of accent or change your voice somehow for big villains. Something that gets an emotional reaction out of your players. Also, in describing their appearance, make them very unique. So that these players remember this villain. They remember this person. It's a big part of the campaign. Make sure it's emotional for them. You know, go into great detail describing what this villain looks like and so on. And like I said, that one of the biggest things, make them proactive, make them reactive. But basically just, you know, what do you want in your campaign as a villain as well? Do you want a certain type of villain that, you know, maybe you do want the prototype take over the world villain. Just make him a little more interesting, give him a reason for that. Villain in one of my campaigns, as an example, was actually a pretty good guy, but he had, technically he was the heir to an empire that had fallen, and the characters saw him as a threat through what he was doing to get that empire back, and he became a villain that way in their eyes. They knew he needed to be stopped, but on his terms, you know, he was taking what technically was rightfully his at that point. So villains aren't necessarily, you know, extremely bad guys. They've just got their motivation for what they're doing, and they think they're right. That's why they're following through with it. So hope this answers a little bit of your question. And I hope a lot of other people chime in, because everybody's going to have, you know, different opinions, different ways to approach it. But just make the villain interesting, make them fun. Don't hide them. Bring them forward into your storyline. Just be careful when you do that, because characters will surprise you, and they will kill villains early if they get the chance. So once again, thanks for the video. Hope this helped. Let me know if you have any other questions, and I'll post some comments. Thanks for watching.